take this opportunity to express our appreciation to the Royal Irish Academy for allowing us the use of this prestigious place for this purpose, and also for agreeing to my request to display An Cach, or An Cá, as some say, Ireland's and my clan's oldest found manuscript, going back to 560 or 630 AD, for public viewing until 5 p.m. May I also express our appreciation to David Grant and his team at the Irish College Leuven for supporting this book project to completion, including its graphic design. My appreciation is also extended to the co-sponsors, the Clans of Ireland, for funding the lease of these two rooms, with the O'Donnell Clan Association for our reception here, as well as with the Clan Irish Family History Centre for co-sponsoring the printing of the book, and to the Genealogical Society of Ireland, which now holds our stock of the book for subsequent sales online. Our thanks are also extended to Leuven Catering, which has been providing the drinks behind, and to the Walsh Colour Print in Castle Island, County Kerry, which has in fact been the printer for this book. Last year was the 550th anniversary of the foundation of Donegal Town, Abbey and Castle, and the 70th anniversary of the O'Donnell Clan Association. The clan united for the first time in 350 years, back at Easter 1954, and underwent a major revival last year in Donegal with a rally of the clans that our President Michael D. Higgins said was the greatest in 400 years, and our adoption of a new clan's constitution and governance with election of a clan council, some of whose members are with us here today, and with yours truly as their president. In the latter capacity, it gives me great pleasure to announce today that in accordance with Article 5.1 and 5.4 of the Constitution of the O'Donnell Clan Association, its council on the 2nd of September has designated two honorary co-patrons with their agreement, and they are, respectively, His Excellency Don Hugo O'Donnell, the 7th Duke of Tetuan in Spain, and Magister Douglas Count O'Donnell von Tyrconnell in Austria, both respective heads of the family in those countries, and Hugo, of course, having succeeded Ua Donel on the decease of the former chief of the name. Other members of our council present this evening are Dr. Mary Louise O'Donnell, our internationally renowned harpist, Mr. Frank Hannigan, our treasurer, and Miss Eileen Coonan O'Connor. You might have noticed a lady at the reception entering here is my wife Vera, and our son Constantine is hovering at the back there. Mary's family hail from County Kerry, as does mine on my father's side. On my mother's side, there's a Donegal connection. Frank Hannigan is of the stock of the McMenamins, a branch of the O'Donnells of Tyrconnell, and Eileen stems from O'Connor Feely, as did Nuala, Queen of Rua I, the founder of Donegal Town and Abbey. We have many others too from home and abroad, including Daniel O'Donnell from San Diego. Our speakers today are Barbara McCormack, the Academy Librarian, who will give us a welcome, Dr. Mary Katharine Simms, Fellow Emeritus of Trinity College and a member of the RIA, co-author with us of this book, to whom we owe with great gratitude the gesture of enabling our use of these premises for this event as a member of the RIA. Our guest speakers will speak briefly for 5 to 7 minutes. Professor John McCafferty, Chair of the Irish Manuscripts Commission and Director of the Micheál MacCraith Institute. Dr. Benjamin Hazard, School of History, UCD, Editor and Researcher of the IMC. Reverend Father Francis Cotter from Doonwira House of Studies, Killarney, Franciscan historian. We will also hear briefly from our print co-sponsors, Luke McInerney of Clans of Ireland, Lasca Hirlock, and Director of Publications, and Paul Manzer, CEO of Enigre, the Irish Family History Centre. But our keynote speaker is former Taoiseach Bertie Ahern, Fellow of the World Academy of Art and Science and co-chairman of the Interaction Council of Former Heads of State and Government. We will conclude the evening with a harp recital by Mary Louise O'Donnell. I will not delve into the identities of the co-authors of this little book, because you can find more about them in the printed copy of the book before you. But I will mention them in my following remarks. First, I would like to begin my more substantive introduction with an aside. by mentioning in passing the late Dutch ambassador, Eddie Kortmans Maltes, who, like our keynote speaker, Bertie Ahern, and myself, was also a fellow of the World Academy of Art and Science, and we had many mutual friends in the post-Cold War era of peace movements, especially during the efforts to establish an interreligious global alliance in peace services, part of which morphed into today's non-violent peace force, part of the peace process in Mindanao and the Philippines, also active in Sudan and has been active in the Middle East. He also served as president of the World Conference on Religion and Peace 30 years ago, the largest such interreligious body at the time, and he was a fellow of the Space Forum Leuven, now the European Space Institute, space being not just the Latin for hope, but for spirituality in economics and society, and based in Leuven. This place is Leuven, or Louvain in French, Louvain, at the heart of such contemporary spirituality-based humanism in Europe. But it has ancient roots centuries ago, and the Irish experience was critical to its flowering. This evening, I will explain the origin of this book and also try to show how the flight of the Earls in 1607 and the concurrent establishment of the Franciscan Irish College of St. Anthony in Leuven, foundation stone laid 10 years later in 1617, fostered the meta-ethnic identity emergence. Beyond Gael or Gael, meaning Gael being foreigner for those of you who don't know, or Celt and Anglo-Norman, and it incubated a modern sense of Irishness. We find this expressed in Tygo Keanoin's contemporary account of the flight of the Earls, that is in the modern translation edited by Noligo Morelis, from Rochmuelain to Rome, or in Irish, Rusnadishik Notach Os Eirith, and brought out by our co-author, who cannot be here with us this evening because he's in Rome, Professor Father Micheál MacCraith, Franciscan, who notes about Keanon that he never employs the term Gael, but instead uses the word Éireannach or Éireannic to denote Irish people, and in one instance implied Náisiún Éireannach, Irish nation. The genesis of this Irishness was also profoundly faith-based, rooted in resilience against religious persecution during the Reformation, a resilience that would endure, conjoining Gael and Gael and other new Irish, such as the Ulster Scots, in the later Jacobite resistance and its later exile to France. It also bucked the trend after the Treaty of Augsburg in 1555, that cuius regio eius religio, that is, that the ruler determines the faith of the subjects, not in Ireland, as co-author Count Douglas O'Donnell on Tyrconnell elucidates in our book. When the O'Donnells were concerned on their ascendancy in Tyrconnell itself, a partial result of Fitzgerald's support in 1248, it was the advent of the Franciscans in Donegal that civilized Gaelic society there, rendered it more peaceful and sociable, and led to the historically close relationship between the O'Donnells and the Franciscans, one that the publication of this book marks. Indeed, the last putative chief of the name was one of both O'Donnell, both Franciscan, the late Father Hugh Ambrose O'Donnell, who passed away 2 years ago, but who abjured such honours. He was a devoted missionary in Africa for many years. Now, by civilized, the Franciscan influence in Donegal, I must explain that the Franciscan advent strengthened the faith, morality, and rule of the O'Donnells, and resulted from the initiative of Nuala, the daughter of O'Connor of Failey, mother of Éirua, Red Hugh I, the founder of Donegal Castle, town, and abbey. In 1474, she threatened the Franciscans that if they failed to accept her invitation to establish a friary in Donegal, she would charge them with the loss of all the souls which your reluctance may cause to perish in the territory of Tyrconnell. Of course, it also meant the gradual abandonment of the casual polygamy of the Coin Law and that, under the subsequent intrusive adherence to Gregorian canon law, but also thereby the dilution of women's customary rights, as Dr. Simms points out in her chapter on the role of queens. The Franciscan mission in Tyrconnell was therefore to be evangelical, and as elsewhere in Ireland, that order benefited in return from the patronage of great families and the intake of their sons in the novitiate, as Luke McInerney mentions in our foreword, which he co-authors with Galway O'Cally. The friary in Donegal was to strengthen not only local power dynastically, but the foundations for greater peace and prosperity, has emerged in the century that followed, most notably through the reign of King Manus Uadona, whom the English writer, the Lord Deputy St. Ledger, described in 1542 as furnished of other appareil better than any Irishman, so honourable, and all the rest of his nation so vile. Manus was considered a prince of Renaissance standing, on par with the continental, and one might say English Tudor fashions of the day. The O'Donnell patronage of the Franciscans for a strong mutual relationship was continued by succeeding generations, including into exile, leading to the establishment of the College of St. Anthony of Padua. By the way, St. Anthony of Padua was apparently Portuguese, not in Leuven. In fact, even in my own life, my birth family maintained a very close relationship and support of the Custodia Franciscalis Terrae Sanctae, that is, the Franciscans of the Holy Land, where we lived from 1965 to 67. St. Francis had brokered their custody of the holy places with the Sultan Malik al-Kamal as a manner of preserving the Christian presence as living stones, following the defeat of the Crusader Knights by Salah ad-Din at the Battle of the Horns of Hattin in 1187. A very special friend of our family was Father Godfrey Kloetzli, OFM, who passed away in 1992, an American avid biblical archaeologist and pilgrimage guide in the Holy Land, and a very dear family friend who lived nearby at Cafarnaum in Galilee on the shores of the sea. There are 4 Franciscans who proved particularly helpful in my own research over the recent decades, and I will mention briefly. Father Vincent Galogli, Father John Keeley, who was the last priest to serve in the Irish College in Leuven, and he showed me the premises some years ago. The late Father Ignatius Fennessy of Doonwilla, who passed away a couple of years ago, and Father Micheál MacCraith, professor in Rome, guardian of St. Isidore's. Now I will explain the significance of the date, 5th of September, for the launch. It is the date in which Donald O'Donnell died in Spanish Flanders, in Belgium. He was the first person to be buried in the new chapel of St. Anthony of Padua in the Irish College and interred before the high altar. He was the nephew of the famous Red Hugh O'Donnell, who fought and lost the 9 Years' War and died in Salamanca in Spain in 1602. And his brother Rory, who became the first Earl of Tyrconnell, but fled Ireland with O'Neill and 97 others by boat from Rathmullen to Spanish Flanders in 1607, dying in Rome in 1608. Donegal was the last heir of the first family of their father, and Redhugh and Rory being the children of their father's second family. Donegal was also the beneficiary in remainder to the lordship of Tyrconnell, as per the letter statement. Now, our book describes the rich history and culture of these emigre scholars, clerics, soldiers, and nobles, at a time when the first notion of Irishness succeeded the old ethnic identities of Gael and Gael, Celt or Anglo-Norman, etc. It was, in fact, not a Gael who funded the first Irish college, the first Irish Gaelic printing press in Leuven, the first printing press ever anywhere in Gaelic, but a Shannon Howell Franciscan from the old English family in County Louth, the very meek and humble Father Robert Chamberlain, who used his Spanish pension to do so, thus contributing in this way to the emergence of what we now call the Global Irish, as our co-author, Professor Johan Verberckmoes, indicates in his chapter. And it is in the comforting sanctuary, therefore, of hosting institutions such as the Irish colleges abroad, not just in Leuven, but in Spain, in Paris, in Prague, and in many other places, that such families as the Spoilberg de Louvenjoul and the Baron Snoy de Perse, and the dynastic patronage of the Bourbons and the Habsburgs, that our exiles and emigres managed to preserve their cultural heritage and affiliations for many centuries, to cherish their traditions and lineages and social fabric, and evolve their sense of who they were towards the norms and values of the European mainstream, yet becoming, in a sense, more Irish than the folk back home. And it is fitting that the current Baron Bernard Snoy de Perse is one of our co-authors too. The importance of this intangible cultural heritage, a concept now preserved in an international convention of UNESCO since 2003, is not just the cultural manifestation itself, but rather the wealth of knowledge and skills that is transmitted through it from one generation to the next. The social and economic transmission of this from minority groups and mainstream groups within any state is as important for developing countries as industrialist countries. Now, I have a lot more to say on that, but I reserve it for my concluding remarks, because I'm conscious that I tend to talk too much. And I do want to pass the floor on to Baron Bernard Snoy, who will say a few words of welcome to us on behalf of the URI. Thank you.
On behalf of the Royal Irish Academy, it is my distinct honour and pleasure to welcome you to this special occasion, marking the launch of Memorialising Emigre Dignity, the Cultural Heritage of St Anthony's College Leuven. We are privileged to host this event in celebration of a publication that not only enriches our understanding of Irish cultural heritage abroad, but also exemplifies the enduring scholarly and historical ties between Ireland and continental Europe. We are particularly pleased to acknowledge the contributions of the O'Donnell family, whose long-standing connection to Leuven is thoughtfully revisited in this volume. Their association with St Anthony's College dates back to the 17th century, and their legacy is also deeply rooted and embedded in the history of the Royal Irish Academy. It was over 180 years ago that Sir Richard O'Donnell presented the 6th century Psalter of St Columba, known as the Cathal or the Battler, to the Academy. This manuscript, one of Ireland's most treasured artefacts, had been safeguarded by the O'Donnell family for centuries. In the 11th century, for instance, the head of the O'Donnell clan commissioned a silver book shrine to protect it, and this is now, you can see it now in the National Museum. Following the Treaty of Limerick, another member of the O'Donnell family brought the manuscript to France, where he arranged for repairs of the book shrine, and at that time they thought that the shrine contained the relics of St Columba. In the early 19th century, the manuscript returned to Ireland and was entrusted to Sir Neil O'Donnell of Newport in County Mayo. It was unlawfully opened by William Bethel in 1813, which revealed a wooden box and Latin Psalter leaves, and was eventually presented to the Royal Irish Academy in May 1843. And the Academy, since its foundation in 1785, has played a central role in the collection, preservation and study of Irish manuscripts. From its earliest days, the Academy has acquired Irish language manuscripts, historical records and antiquities, forming the cornerstone of Ireland's manuscript heritage. And today it is the largest single repository of Irish language manuscripts in the world. And this includes three autographed copies of the Annals of the Four Masters, 2 of which were produced for the Franciscans at St Anthony's College in Leuven. It's especially fitting then that the launch of this publication takes place here in Academy House, the home of Ireland's premier learning society. And a copy of the volume will be deposited in the Academy Library, where it will serve as a lasting testament to the profound and enduring connection between Ireland and Leuven, and to the shared scholarly legacy that continues to shape our understanding of cultural identity. Thank you very much.
It gives me therefore great pleasure to present Barbara and the Academy with a copy of Now we will hear Dr. Katharine Simms. Thank you.
Hello, I seem to be here in a dual role as a member of the Academy and as a contributor to this volume, Memorialising Emigre Dignity, the Cultural Heritage of St Anthony's College Leuven. As an Academy member, happy to see you all here. Hope you're enjoying the facilities. As one of the contributing authors, I must apologise for an essay that sticks out like a sore thumb, because I'm a medievalist with a cut-off date of about 1500 AD. So I limited myself to thinking about the O'Donnell connection to the Irish College at Leuven, and in particular those strong-minded females of the O'Donnell family who accompanied the flight of the Earls, and the even stronger-minded mother of H.U. O'Donnell, the formidable Ian Dove. And I wrote about the legal and cultural background of queens in medieval Ireland. Every other contributor has combined to demonstrate the extraordinary suitability of the former Franciscan College of Leuven to take on its new role as the Leuven Institute for Ireland and Europe, showing that from its inception in 1607, the community has served as a two-way centre for cultural exchange between Ireland and the continent. And I would sort of like to emphasise that influence going from the continent to Ireland, from Ireland to the continent. So Calderón has outlined the contribution of the wild geese to the armies of the continental powers in both the 17th and 18th centuries. Many of these noble immigrants passing through Leuven, and many of them eventually buried there. And even I, as a medievalist, know that the connection between Ireland and Europe worked both ways, and that the return of Irishmen like Owen Roe O'Neill, who had learnt a scientific approach to the military arts during the 30 Years' War, greatly added to the effectiveness of the war waged by the Confederation of Kilkenny. Johan Verberckmoes has explained the religious and educational contribution of the many Irish colleges, founded not merely by the Franciscans and not only in Leuven, but across the Netherlands, and as we know, they spread wider still from Salamanca in Spain to Rome, to Vienna, to Prague. And again, the influence was not one way, since under the penal laws, every parish priest in Ireland was trained in the continent. Father Micheál MacCraith expounds the influence of the Netherlands under Habsburg rule in shaping a new model of Irish nationalism, indissolubly wedded to the Catholic religion. Already in 1616, we can see its influence during the contention of the bards, when the Franciscan Robert MacArthur Limerick invokes the divine right of kings and natural law to argue that all monster claimants to the high kingship are and were usurpers. This poet appeals to the norms observed by all other kings in the world and threatens rebels with the dire wrath of God and the saints, reasoning that led by the late 17th century to Irish support for the Jacobite cause. Baron Bernard Snoy shows how close were the links that developed between the Irish Franciscans of Leuven and the leaders of Netherlands society. It was this link that rescued the community from complete destruction during the years of the French Revolution, where the friars were sheltered and protected by his ancestor, the Baron Snoy of the day, and how this benevolent family link continued right into the 20th and 21st century. The last two chapters by Frank O'Donnell, prime mover in this project, contain a really impressive wealth of research into the names and backgrounds of the Irish and other notables who over the years have been buried in the graves at Franciscan College. His lengthy catalogue demonstrates the college's wide contacts among noble Irish exiles, and especially its close links with the O'Donnell family, including his own branch. However, that strays well beyond my own field of medievalist, so I recommend the book itself to you for further information.
Thank you very much, Catherine. And I'm aware that she has to rush because she has to travel. So we will continue, and it will give me now the very greatest pleasure to introduce our former Taoiseach and my fellow in the Royal Academy of Art and Science, who is co-chair of the Interaction Council of former heads of state and government, and he has periodically involved me in some of the other issues. Please welcome on Taoiseach Bertie
Thank you very much, Frank, and thank you, Frank, for doing so much work to bring us all together on a Friday afternoon into this beautiful place. Thank Barbara and the Academy Librarian for always being the host of so many events, and so many occasions here and great gatherings of so many interesting people like your good selves for work here, and the fact that this building has been here and has looked after the city of Dublin down through the ages. I always think of when I come into this building how much it would have been like to be the Gresham family who lived here one time, and they obviously got the idea of owning a nice hotel from living here, but it would be a bit costly to be running a house like this as a family home nowadays. But thank you, thanks very much, Barbara, for all your good work and the tremendous work that is done here by the Academy. Thank Dr. Mary Simms for her words as well. I just want to mention before I make my contribution, I want to just thank Frank. I was looking, Frank, at the coat of arms here of the O'Donnells of Tyrconnell, the huge history of the O'Donnells, which is so important in the history of our country and the history of Europe for that matter. And Frank has worked tirelessly to promote that, as he has with the genealogical research and all that goes on with that, and it's just so important. Frank and I shared a good few hats on the international bodies. We're involved in the Interaction Council, which represent 60 or 70 countries around the world, trying to do work on various issues of humanitarian interest, and we on the World Academy of Arts and Science, which again represents, I think, about 80 countries. And we try to look at the problems in the world, being involved in all kinds of wonderful and weird projects to try and help things. But Frank does an enormous amount of research and work. And as you can see with Frank, that as soon as he gets his pen in his hand, the next thing is how you might stop him. Because to rattle out a few thousand words is not a difficult, but always good and always interesting. And this book and this project and the work that Frank and the clan have been doing is really important. And I'm just so, when Frank mentioned to me a long way back in early part of the year, I said I'd be delighted to be along to it, as I am, and to participate in what is an important event and honouring the legacy of one of the most significant institutions in our cultural history. The College of St. Anthony Leuven played a unique and formative role in the preservation and the development and the transmission of Ireland's historical memory and the riches of the Gaelic cultural achievement. And in doing so, St. Anthony's formed an indispensable link to the chain connecting the homeland with the Irish diaspora of the 17th and 18th centuries. And it functioned as a combination of embassy, of university, of information hub and spiritual home for Irish soldiers and merchants. And they in turn supported the college financially. And it also connected the dynamic elements of Gaelic culture with important developments in European thought and in cultural practice, as well as in theology and in religious life. So in celebrating the college as we do today with the launch of this book, we celebrate the extraordinary individuals associated with its foundation and development. Men like Friar and later Archbishop Lawrence Conroy and brother Micheál MacCraith, who celebrated also the legacy of the wide network of Irish colleges as established in Europe to provide education for young men preparing for priesthood, and others denied access to higher learning at home here in Ireland because of the religion. And of course, we celebrate the particular and powerful contribution of Irish Franciscans to all of this extraordinary project. And these different strands, ladies and gentlemen, of the legacy of Leuven are deeply interconnected, because they remind us that Irish history is inextricably bound up with European history, and the Irish identity with European culture. The religious and missionary conviction that drove the likes was a project very much in the mainstream and of the developing approach to preserving European history at the time. as Frank knows, I spent COVID studying the annals of the Four Masters. I'd like to say it was a good read. It was a tough education for 3 hours a day during COVID, but I did get through all volumes by the end of 2023, which I'm very, very proud of. Contributing to the drive to chronicle and preserve Irish history was a concern to document and honour the memory of Irish holy men and women. In the first instance, to assert their Irishness in the face of attempts by others to claim them and to put them aside, not least to prove the Irishness of the Franciscan scholars, John Scotus, the subtle doctor, a key figure in European philosophy and theology. And apart from national pride, there was a practical care to this effort, since celebrating the importance of Ireland for the religious and cultural development of Europe over hundreds of years was a way of reminding the royal and aristocratic patrons of whom the college depended of the debt Europe owed to the Irish. So the culture, ladies and gentlemen, of learning and teaching that was essential for these tasks arose from the primary goal of training young men to return to the mission in Ireland, often in hazardous conditions and circumstances. It also equipped them to take their place in the academics of Europe and to play their part in the great theological and philosophical debates of their time. And while individual Irish colleges in their early years drew students from particular regional and ethnic backgrounds, one of the accomplishments of Leuven and other places was to foster a common Irish identity that transcended regional distinctions and the divisions between Gael and the Anglo-Norman. And the unifying effect was symbolised, I think, by the promotion of the status of St. Patrick as national patron. While some of today's business leaders might regard that as the most successful branding exercise ever, and I wouldn't disagree with that, but the history of Leuven demonstrates the importance of complex historical forces at work over time. And it also shows, however, the critical importance of individuals through their dedication, their energy, and God-given talents. And it is entirely fitting to have now recorded and readily available in the publication that we launched today details of all those who were interned in St. Anthony so that they can appreciate their story. A publication of this record of the distinguished Franciscans buried in Leuven is timely, as we also celebrate this year the 400th anniversary of the founding of St. Isidore in Rome by Father Luke Wadding. I know that the College of Rome is also preparing to celebrate the 400th anniversary of the foundation of Father Wadding in 2028. And of course, Frank, we cannot celebrate these great Franciscans without remarking on the critical importance of the connection many had with the O'Donnells. Florence Conroy had been chaplain to Red Hugh O'Donnell, and the clerics were traditional O'Donnell family historians. The O'Neills and O'Donnells were received in state in Leuven 1607, as you said, and young O'Donnells were entrusted to the care of the Franciscans when the adults continued their journey on to Rome. And among those interned in St. Anthony's was the impressively independent Nuala O'Donnell, who succeeded in extracting a pension from the Spanish king and nearly succeeding in getting another from the English king. They were always good in Donegal. St. Anthony's College in Leuven is, ladies and gentlemen, a very sacred place. It is sacred to the memory of the Franciscans who gave their all in the service of their faith and their countrymen, as they've always done. It is sacred to all Irish men and women, wherever their religious beliefs and whatever they were, because of the unique contribution to Irish history, to culture, to religious tradition. So standing in St. Anthony's, like standing in St. Isidore's and the other great Irish Franciscan church in San Pedro and Montanoro in Rome, by the graves of O'Neill and O'Donnells, which I have the privilege of doing on a number of times, is immensely moving experience. And it would be a tragedy, I say this for all Irish people, were we ever to lose a sense of connection to these special places of scholarship, sacrifice and pilgrimage. It would be a great historical injustice if the immense contribution of the Franciscan order to Irish culture were to be forgotten. And it would be a sad day indeed if our awareness of the legacy of great families like the O'Donnells were to be lost. And it would be a great weakening of our political culture if we were ever to lose sight of just how closely entwined with Europe our destiny has always been. But it has not yet been, or it is not one-way traffic. Just a short distance away from where we are this afternoon, the impact of Irish missionaries in Europe is the medieval period. It's been celebrated through an exhibition at the National Museum of Ireland. A few weeks ago we celebrated down in Kerry the 250th anniversary of the birth of Daniel O'Connell, the liberator, who gave to European political culture an outstanding example of how democratic mobilisation could bring about constitutional change and respect human rights and dignity. I want to salute today and congratulate the authors and publishers of this important text. I want to thank you, Frank, for bringing everyone together and the work around today. And those whose support has been made this publication possible. Though we are not only honouring and preserving critical elements of our shared past, we are affirming the vital importance of the humanities and of the scholarship in enabling us to understand ourselves. And we can more confidently chart a course into the unknown future through a better understanding of where we've come from and of the debt which we owe to those who brought us here. So I thank you, Frank. I thank everybody involved in the publication, and let us try and spread out the message to those that would rather forget. Thank you very much.
This doesn't seem to be working. Good. Okay. Now that's a bit better. The green light is on. Thank you. Thank you very much. We will now move to the series of guest speakers, and I would like to invite Professor Johan Verberckmoes, Chair of the Irish Manuscripts Commission and Director of the Micheál MacCraith Institute in UCD. Professor John?
So it's a great pleasure to be here. It's all sort of that show up the notes. I'm the Chair of the Manuscripts Commission, as Mark said, and also at UCD, where we have a partnership with the Irish Franciscans, so we preserve essentially the written archive of the college at Leuven. And I just want to say a few things about the book and the relationship between Ireland and Leuven or Louvain that I think are important for us to understand. But I have to digress and give you another story which may help us all understand. So I have a cousin who wrote a book, and his book was moderately successful. And as you know, if you write a book and it's moderately successful, the publisher says, what's the next book? Because they want to monetize your book. So he told me that his next book was going to be Cozy Crime. And I had never heard of cozy crime before, and I was fascinated by the concept of cozy crime. So cozy crime is Miss Marple. It's afternoon tea, scones and cream and dead bodies. And I thought, cozy crime, that's a really interesting concept. Cozy crime is a bit like what we see the rise of today, which is cozy history, which is history which is co-opted for various, often not so cozy purposes. So the mass amnesia of, let's think of a random state which forgets that it's entirely composed of an immigrant population since the 17th century. kind of mass amnesia, which creates a cosy narrative of essentialism and so on. And I think these are traps that we can fall into very, very easily. And one of the great things about a publication like this is it problematizes those easy narratives. And I think one of the ways in which we can understand that is to think about the way the friars wrote the Annals of the Four Masters, as Bertie just said. He went through, and you'll recall that at the beginning they date the completion of the text. But what's really interesting is that these four quintessential Gaelic scholars date the completion of the text by saying that it is the reign of King Charles I. So straight away we get this strange dissonance, and the guy who bought the paper for them was an MP in the Irish Parliament, O'Gara. So I think it's very, very important on occasions like this, and this is why I love publications like this, to remember that our sometimes cosy narratives of an easy transition from some point in the past to the concerns we have today are not always justified by the evidence. So I want to complete that thought by suggesting to you that it's very, very important that we always remember why the friars established these colleges. And again, the previous speaker just mentioned the pastoral and theological quality of this endeavour. Because, of course, while we choose to remember that this is the point at which Irish identity begins to emerge in a post-ethnic way, which is really, really important, we must always remember that the central task of the friars was to defend what they considered to be the true faith. And that their articulation of Irishness was based on an equal articulation of Catholicism, and that people like Luke Wadding and Flaherty and Whale Conora were concerned with, as you said, the central theological debates of their own day. So we never get a clean line between the past and the present or the future that we would like to live in. What we get are complex arrangements, complex understandings, and often contradictory kind of statements. If I'd been writing an official history of Ireland in the reign of Charles I, I may well have thought it prudent to say, "Thank you very much, Your Sacred Majesty, for ruling over us," even as I was constructing a narrative that said perhaps quite the opposite. So I will leave you with that contradictory thought about what another previous Taoiseach called the totality of relationships, and just compliment the Academy and compliment the authors of this book, which do so much to restore the complexity and the texture of our often conflicted and contradictory histories. Thank you very much.
I seem to have misplaced my timepiece, but you seem to be more or less on schedule. It's a great privilege now to introduce Dr. Benjamin Hazard of the School of History at UCD, University College Dublin, which was founded as a Catholic university by the late Cardinal St. John Henry. And I was very interested to see that King Charles III in London visited the Brompton Oratory in the past few days, and in fact the rooms where Cardinal Newman, St. Newman, hung out in his last days and where he passed away. So Ben, you have the floor. You are also involved with the Irish Manuscripts Commission, and we know each other for quite a few years, I think.
Yes.
So I can maybe do this job.
It's more an hour than shot. I'm going to be speaking to you about the burial of Red Hugh O'Donnell, Rua O'Donnell, and his kinsman, William Burke, in Valladolid, in Spain. So the title of the paper is that his body was taken to Valladolid. I am most grateful to Frank O'Donnell for inviting me to contribute today. and I offer the organisers of the event my congratulations. I spent many happy months as a student in Valladolid, that is, the city in Spain, in Castile, during my research at the Archivo General de Simancas, which is a castle which, in the reign of Charles V in the 16th century, became the state archive, and it remains the state archive to this day. So can everybody in the room hear me? Valladolid was an ancient capital, and from 1601 to 1606, the court of Philip III resided in the city. After Kinsale, Éirua O'Donnell set sail in a ship bound for Spain, before travelling south to Simancas, near Valladolid, to appeal to Philip III, but died on the 10th of September 1602. And to this day, when you go to Simancas, there is a bronze plaque on the wall of the castle in Simancas in Irish and in Spanish to the memory of Red Hugh O'Donnell. In keeping with his patronage of the Friars Minor in Ireland, he was buried in a friar's habit at the chapter house of Valladolid's Franciscan Friary, which was among the most important buildings in the city. Fortunately, these historical details were preserved in the Baja Éirua O'Donnell of 1616, now kept here at the Royal Irish Academy. After the death of Éirua, Theobald Burke, the McWilliam Burke, travelled to Spain as a pledge of loyalty to Philip III. The McWilliam Burke was from the barony of Tiroli, County Mayo, where there were two Franciscan foundations on the banks of the Moy. At Rosserk stood a Franciscan Third Order house, while the Franciscan Friary at Moyne was founded before 1555 by the McWilliam Burkes. When pestilence struck within the walls of Valladolid in 1604, McWilliam Burke fell seriously ill. He suffered for a month from malaria and was taken to St. Francis Friary, where he was only able to consume bread and water in his final 3 days. On the 11th of November 1604, the last McWilliam Burke was laid to rest in Valladolid, with honours accorded by Philip III of Spain. The burial took place in the chapter house at the Franciscan Friary of St. Francis in Valladolid, and I discovered these documents whilst I was in Spain on my PhD research. McWilliam Burke was interred next to his kinsman, Éirua O'Donnell, who had died 2 years earlier, and this was fitting, for Éirua had played an important role in McWilliam Burke's life. In a ceremony that took place in Ireland in December 1595, O'Donnell had inaugurated his protege as the McWilliam Burke. At Valladolid, in the friary where both received honourable burials, they renewed their family links to Franciscan foundations. The Franciscans found themselves at the very heart of Valladolid at this time. However, during the Spanish Revolution of 1836, the friary was completely demolished. This destroyed any sign of these emblematic buildings, which had stood on a large site next to the market square, initially located outside the city walls. Over the centuries, this area became the centre of the city, next to the current Plaza Mayor. A plaque now commemorates the friary's location, where the first tomb of Christopher Columbus was found. These grounds housed a church, several cloisters, a guest house, an orchard, enclosures and gardens.
Despite its size, it had only 2 gates. One granted access from the Plaza Mayor at the main gate. Immediately beyond a large enclosure was the Friary's church. The other entrance was level with the Church of Santiago, on the street of the same name. The absence of physical remains has hitherto hampered the work of historians and archaeologists who have attempted to reconstruct the layout of the friary and its original appearance. This scientific interest has been fueled by the assertion that Christopher Columbus and Éarua O'Donnell were buried in this place a century apart, as well, of course, as we've now established with William Burke. In the case of Columbus, he was temporarily laid to rest in the friary. Micheál Castro in Valladolid has located the first Columbus tomb precisely where further investigations located Éarua O'Donnell's burial site. The tombs were found in the chapter house, as established in both the Baha Éarua O'Donnell and as well, continuing the theme from what the Taoiseach mentioned earlier, mentioned in the Annals of the Four Masters. Now, these are sources which, as you would expect, Spanish historians and archaeologists are otherwise unaware of, until I brought them to their attention. The tombs were found in the chapter house, which was known as the Chapel of Wonders. Micheál Castro invited me to participate in the project after reading my PhD findings, where I dealt with the burial places of Éarua O'Donnell and his kinsman, William Burke. And this monograph was published by the Royal Irish Academy in 2009, with help from Professor Hiram Morgan. A 3D reconstruction of the Valladolid Friary is based upon plans drawn up after the suppression in the 1830s. This enables us to view the exterior of the Friary Church from the old market square. It also helps us to learn about the different rooms and explore inside the friary. However, there are no height references in the extant sources. Furthermore, no drawings, paintings, or lithographs of the church buildings survive. The results of archaeological excavations in the area were also used. A fundamental part of this project was derived from the work to locate the remains of O'Donnell. But further excavation data was also relevant. A ground-penetrating radar survey was conducted in December 2021 and subsequently completed by the company Geozone. Rather than creating detailed images that resemble high-resolution photographs, the team have achieved a virtual representation of the lost Franciscan friary. This presents the different rooms as intelligibly and recognizably as possible. The 3D image gallery shows that the Franciscan friary looked like and what it looked like in the 16th and 17th centuries. And for instance, it shows among these images that we now have to hand from our work, the main cloister, an image of the main cloister, leading to the chapter house where the burials took place. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ben. And before you depart, I give you a copy of the final piece. Okay, it seems to come and go. I'm beginning to wonder whether, in fact, we don't have another book in the making with these fantastic presentations. A challenge to the RIA this time, maybe. But let me just, because you talked about tombs and proximity, Burke and O'Donnell and so on, If you get to Vienna and you visit Schubert Park, you will discover, as with many capital cities in Europe, that the former graveyard has become a public park. And in Schubert Park, called after Franz Schubert, the composer, there are 2 monuments remaining of the old graveyard, and they are respectively at a little distance of a few feet from Ben to me, basically, the tombstone of Franz Schubert and the tombstone of Ludwig van Beethoven. And there's 2 empty spaces in between. Now, there's nobody buried there anymore. The tombstones remain, but the bodies of Beethoven and Schubert and all the others were moved to the Zentralfriedhof somewhere else in Vienna. But Schubert died, when he died, he wanted to be buried beside Beethoven, but he couldn't, because somebody else got there first. A noble Austrian lady and a Count Johan O'Donnell. So there you go. I would like to invite Father Francis Cotter to join us and give us his cúpla focal, as we say in Irish. Thank you very much. I hope this was
Good evening, everyone. Delighted to be here on behalf of the Irish Franciscan Province, and my warmest congratulations and indeed gratitude to all who have made this significant volume possible. The Fioretti of St. Francis, the Little Flowers, was compiled in the late 14th century. It tells various charming stories of Francis and his first companions. Well, the Irish province has its own Fioretti. And one tells the tale of a poor friar who was invited to speak at an important gathering, not as august as this. And he did his best. But there was a lukewarm response, an obvious lukewarm response. And at the reception afterwards, he said to one of the attendees, "That didn't go down too well, did it?" And the man answered, "I don't blame you at all. I blame the bloody fool who invited you." With that salutary tale in mind, I begin. I've been asked to speak of the Franciscans today. One could approach this topic solely from the perspective of numbers, houses and provinces in the order today. However, a gentle warning to the faint-hearted. I will speak very definitely from a faith perspective. The Franciscan life is not just history for us. We strive by the grace of God to live it each day, and it's a living reality. 50 years ago this month, I was snatched from the cradle. I professed the same rule as my rightly revered brothers in St. Anthony's 4 centuries ago. And the very first line of the rule that Francis gave us is, "The rule and life of the Friars Minor is to live the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ." And it's no accident that the very first book printed in the Irish language by the friars in St. Anthony's was a Catholic catechism. Our life has no meaning without rootedness in Christ and trust in his grace. In 5 years, the Friars in Ireland will celebrate the 800th anniversary of the establishment of the province at the Pentecost chapter in Assisi in May 1230. And despite turmoil and persecution, the province has been in continuous existence since then. Down through the centuries, as has been mentioned, the Franciscan friars have been a major presence, not just in the ecclesia, but even in the civil life of Irish people. I remember when I was studying as a young friar living in Collegio Sant'Isidoro, Roma, the Cardinal O'Fee, Archbishop of Armagh of happy memory, he visited the community there. He was very fond of the friars because he lived in St. Anthony's College when he was studying in Leuven. And on this particular visit, I remember this church historian and Gaelic scholar saying that he believed that if Irish history had a sound, it would be the flap of the Franciscan sound. Because of increasing numbers, Franciscan provinces are being reorganized throughout the order. the Irish and the English provinces were brought together in 2014, a miraculous achievement. We have had the great sorrow of closing several of our friaries, and I'm not ashamed to admit I wept when I saw the tears of the people at the final Mass in Athlone Friary, where the friars have been among the people since before 1240. We presently have 8 friaries in Ireland, 3 in England and 1 in Glasgow. If I live long enough, I may be part of a Western European province with my provincial far away in Munich, which may have distinct advantages. Today, worldwide, the friars number about 13,000 friars in 120 countries. So we're not going anywhere just yet, thank God. Giacomo Bini, a revered former Minister General, told us that we friars basically are called to hold out 2 hands to the world, the hand of faith and the hand of mercy. So, when I'm speaking today of Franciscans today, I just would like to introduce you to some friars who are seeking to do that throughout the world. Short vignettes, as it were. To start close from home, I think of Friar Eamon O'Driscoll, a good man from Drimna, my fellow novice in our beautiful friary in Rosnowla, County Donegal. He, along with the fraternity there, ministers the Lord's compassion and comfort to the many, many people who come long distances to the friary, a designated centre for peace and reconciliation just a few miles from the border. I think of Friar Micheál Lenihan from County Limerick, who volunteered for our mission in Central America in the 1980s. Some years ago, the poor man was chosen to be the first Archbishop of the city of San Pedro Sula in Honduras, a notorious centre of drug trafficking. Michael has been courageous in denouncing the violence and the great suffering inflicted on the people, and he has received death threats. But he has stood firm. And when the friars warned him, he said, "It will just mean I'll get to heaven before you." And then there's Friar Ewan MacMullen from County Tyrone. He was a successful barrister working with Baroness Nuala O'Loan, the first police ombudsman for Northern Ireland. And then, on a visit to Assisi, Christ's grace pierced his heart, and he gave it all up and joined the order. And then 2 years ago, Massimo, our present Minister General, asked him to be part of the Franciscans International team based in Geneva. Because way back in 1989, the Franciscan family were granted a general consultative status by the United Nations. And so we work within the United Nations to give a voice to the voiceless. In Jerusalem, there is Pier Baptista Pizzaballa. In 1342, Pope Clement VI officially entrusted the care of all the sanctuaries in the Holy Land to the Friars Minor. Now, in the custody of the Holy Land, there are friars from 23 nations ministering in Israel, Palestine, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, and Egypt. Pier Baptista was custos of that custody, and Pope Francis liked what he saw and named him Latin Patriarch in Jerusalem in 2020. Now, in his new arduous role, Pier Baptista strives with the friars to be agents of hope and healing in the midst of a dark and dreadful reality. As an aside, it seems that the last conclave, Pier Baptista was really papabile, in other words, seriously considered to be for Pope. The Italians were desperate to get the papacy back. If elected, he would have succeeded the first Jesuit Pope, and it should be noted that the last and the fifth Franciscan Pope, Clement XIV, suppressed the Jesuits in 1773. Pope Francis didn't hold it against us. In Syria, we meet Friar Ibrahim Abala, the young parish priest in St. Francis Parish in Aleppo. who, along with the other friars in Syria, stayed with the people throughout the barbarity and the horror of the war there. And as they have done for centuries, the friars continue to support the small, endangered Christian communities in Syria that date back to apostolic times. Now to Zimbabwe, where the Irish province has a mission since 1958. I introduce Friar Cilicio Mukumbwe. Cilicio, along with 2 other friars, has the pastoral care of the Mutemwa Leprosy Care Centre and the surrounding area in rural Zimbabwe. The centre provides a home for destitute people living with leprosy or AIDS or mental and physical disabilities. On to Ukraine, where we meet Friar Rumul Zarkeski, a member of the fraternity in the city of Knokko, 90 kilometers from the border with Russia. The friary now houses refugees, and Romuald coordinates the food kitchen and other supports, including trauma therapy for the children. As of now, no friar has been killed in the war there, but some of our friaries have been seriously damaged by missiles, and the newly built, it broke their hearts, a newly built Franciscan secondary school was completely destroyed. In a more serene setting in Vietnam, there is Friar Joseph, who will be ordained a priest next week, God willing, in Hanoi, along with 14 other friars. This young friar is studying in Rome, and was with us in Ireland this summer learning English. And so, not just history, the rhythm of our Franciscan life and ministry goes on in very, very different circumstances in our numerous houses in 120 countries. The monastic tradition exhorted fuga mundi, flee the world, and indeed the monks of the Egyptian desert were warned, run from bishops and women. In that order. In complete contrast, Francis tells us the world is our cloister. Among the people, among the ordinary, among the everyday, we are to find God. And our deep experience has been that we friars are at our best in a ministry of simple presence and accompaniment. During the 13th century, some friars, in their great Franciscan humility, spread a story that on Mount Laverna, where St. Francis received the stigmata, sacred stigmata in September 1224, Christ promised him in that vision that the order would continue until he, Christ, returned again. I don't know if the Irish province was included in that particular province. However, I do know, as I view the Franciscans of today, that our 800-year-old tradition is vibrant, and the Spirit of the Lord is still active and fruitful among us. Thank you.
Father Francis. You might have noticed I'm a Francis too, not a Francisco. My mother called me after St. Francis Xavier, though I like to think Francis of Assisi is a great inspiration. And interesting that there are 13,000 Franciscans in the world today. It's almost the same number, slightly more perhaps, and the number of members of the Order of Malta, the Knights and Dames of Malta, who trace their way back to Jerusalem, in fact, to Blessed Gerard, who founded the order there as the Knights of St. John, the Hospitaller Knights, as it were, in the Holy Land. I understand that Cardinal Pizzabella lately was in Gaza, celebrating Holy Mass in the church, the only Catholic church remaining in Gaza, which has been partially destroyed by Israeli bombardment. And our heart, I think, goes out to him and all the comforters around the world. I would now like to invite our print co-sponsors. So Luke McInerney will speak for Clans of Ireland, and then Paul Manzor will speak for Ennital and the Irish Family History Centre. Thank you.
Roy of Golair, and Creedmoor Inwood. Is Micheál MacCraith, Les Cohela, and Finch and So welcome everyone here today at our great gathering. My name is Luke McInerney, the Vice Chairman of the Clans of Ireland. So on behalf of Finch and Heron, Clans of Ireland, I wish to welcome everyone here tonight to the Royal Irish Academy for the launch of this long-awaited publication. As a Les Cohela, tonight resonates in a particularly poignant way for Finch and Heron. Not only are we celebrating and remembering the achievement of the Irish Franciscans at Leuven, but we are doing so in this esteemed institution of Irish learning, where some of the keystone texts of Irish history, culture, and identity are now securely kept. When one considers what may rightly be called the Leuven achievement, one cannot deny that achievement rests on a number of historical elements. The first of which was the role of the Irish Franciscans and the commitment to Irish, or more specifically Gaelic, learning and scholarship. This was nothing new at the time of the foundation of St Anthony's College in 1607. In fact, the Franciscans had integrated into Gaelic society and were promoters of Gaelic scholarship in the 15th century through the expansion into Gaelic territories of the observant Franciscan movement a century or so prior to the Reformation. The inroads which the Franciscans made with the Gaelic elite in the later medieval period were to serve them well, and it is one explanation for the failure of the Reformation in much of Ireland, bucking the well-known maxim, Curius regio, eius religio. The other historical element that underscored the Leuven achievement is the role of the hereditary Gaelic professional class, the Fili and Shenachie kindreds, who were disproportionately attracted to the mendicant orders such as the Franciscans. And so it was this cohort of educated men who were well aware of their elevated social standing and their confidence in classical Gaelic scholarship, which drove this Leuven achievement. Take, for example, a random list of some of the founding friars of St Anthony's College and consider their own family backgrounds. O'Cleary, O'Mulconra, Machanvard, O'Hiha, O'Huhusa, just to name but a few. All of these were families with a great tradition of Gaelic scholarship going back to the medieval period. They worked with other custodians of Gaelic learning, such as the O'Durcanan, Macbroda, and MacEagan, learner kindreds, among others. All of this in the pursuit of learning, culture, and identity. Theirs was an achievement wrought through collaboration, scholarship, and in many cases, kinship. And it is to this latter point, that of kinship, which I shall now turn to. As you would have guessed, the work of the Clans of Ireland, who are one of the sponsors of today's publication, focuses on the clans, or historically attested kindred groups, that flourished in Ireland down to the 17th century. So our work today is focused on promoting and supporting Irish clan and family organisations worldwide. And to this end, our interest in the lineage-based system, which came to characterise Gaelic and Gaelicised Ireland, extends to the activity of the Irish Franciscans at Leuven, as many of them were prominent in Gaelic society and had links to the Ostdorna, or the learner class of Gaelic Ireland. As the publication being launched here tonight represents an exploration of the Irish diaspora, sometimes termed the wild geese, it is important to recognise these links with the Gaelic milieu that many of these early Franciscans at Leuven operated in. Leuven and its Franciscan community served not just as a powerhouse of Gaelic scholarship, and learning, but also as a refuge, a safe haven, as it were, for the leading members of the O'Neills and O'Donnells following the Battle of Kinsale and the flight of the Earls. I'd like to finally touch on the topic of the Irish diaspora and identity. The 17th century was a period when Irish identity and culture was both under threat, but also when it reasserted itself. We have the publication of Foras Versa e Era, which helped fuse Catholicism and Irish identity, and was instrumental in reconciling the Gaelic Irish with the Old English, united, as it were, under a broader, newly articulated Catholic identity. It was an identity that its author, priest Geoffrey Keating, embodied, for he himself was of Old English descent on his paternal side, but Gaelic Irish on his maternal side. This growing awareness of a new identity was forged in the cauldron of war, confiscation, and turmoil of the 17th century. But it was also forged by a different kind of study of Ireland's past and her historical documents. One which was made possible by the Franciscans in America and the far-reaching project which they initiated and which came to fruition through the compilation of the Annals of the Four Masters. This provided a bedrock upon which new explorations of Irish identity, culture, and history could be encountered and explained. It is for this reason that the Leuven achievement ought to be regarded not simply as an achievement of the Franciscans, but as an achievement of the Irish people more generally. In fact, the seeds sown in Leuven and other colleges on the continent, such as at St. Isidore's College in Rome, were reaped down the years and proved to be surprisingly resilient and enduring, shaping the notion of Irishness and reactions to it for centuries. Today, in an age of instant communications and increasingly transnational global culture, it is ever more pertinent to pay homage to these early investigators and preservers of Irish culture and history. In doing so, we can appreciate both the past and future in terms of our history and identity, and reflect upon what has changed and indeed what has endured. We hope that the publication, Memorialising Emigre Dignity, helps forward a more nuanced understanding, a more nuanced appreciation of the Leuven achievement. It also shows what is possible through the collaboration of cultural organisations, academics, and independent scholars. So I wish to thank all of those who were involved in bringing this project finally to the printing press. And a big thank you to you all here tonight for turning out and celebrating not just the Leuven achievement, but this achievement. Gomil Mahadov, August Mila Buikas Arish.
Thanks very much, Luke. Now, the last of our speakers, except for a few words from me at the end, is Paul Mansour, who is the CEO of Enniclan, the Irish Family History Centre. And we also have with us today Fiona Fitzsimons, who is also very much behind, in fact, co-founder and director of Enniclan. So I want to invite you to say your few words and take the floor.
I'm going to be very brief, don't worry. I am not a scholar of this period, so I'm not trying to pretend that I am. But by a strange coincidence, I just happened to be in Dunwere this morning and visiting the truly wonderful archive there. And it's just another strange coincidence that I should now be here today speaking on this. It's wonderful to be here back in the Royal Irish Academy. When Enniclan was founded almost more than 27 years ago by Brian Donovan and Fiona Fitzsimons, one of its goals was to try and make Irish historical records and Irish history more accessible to some scholars, but mostly to the general public, and to try and convince people that not every scrap of Irish history was destroyed in 1922. Since then, huge strides have been made in making available primary historical sources that ordinary people believe the decade of centenaries further led people's appetites to discover and learn about our history. These days it feels like facts and research can be buried by those who try to shed an interest. It is now more than ever that fact and scholarly research must be supported, and it is to this end that Enniclan, in a very small way, is delighted to help to make this publication possible. To continue to support scholarly research and to try to make history accessible to all who want to read it, and in this case to learn more about the deep connections between Ireland and Europe. I'd like to commend those who contributed to the supported publication. I'd also like to offer my thanks and congratulations to Grant and Amb, who has been the driving force in getting this to print. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you also, Fiona. We have just a few more minutes to go before I turn over to Mary Louise O'Donnell, who will entertain us with some classical Irish art music. And I want to just make a few follow-up points. For some decades, I have struggled with microphones. And it'll go off again in a moment, but never mind. I have felt that preserving intangible cultural heritage is an important factor in maintaining our cultural diversity in the face of growing globalization, let alone its homogenizing modernity. Intangible cultural heritage helps with intercultural dialogue. It encourages mutual respect for other ways of life. And so far, 181 countries, that's most of the world, have actually ratified UNESCO's Convention on Safeguarding Intangible Cultural Heritage, a convention that dates back to 2003. Ireland ratified it, as it often does, many years later, in 2015, and after quite some lobbying on my part. And so far, 3 recommendations I had made to our government have yielded UNESCO's registration so far, being the Irish sport of hurling, the playing of the uilleann pipes, and Irish harping. And through the fact that there are stakeholder communities that mobilized to get these things recognized. Now, we have an awful lot more intangible cultural heritage in this country that should be recognized by UNESCO. And I hope that the government will keep up the effort and that stakeholder communities will organize to make this happen. Whatever it is, from heraldry to shanno singing, or the King of Dalkey, or Puck Fair in Gilorglin, or whatever it is. The important thing is that there's a wonderful feedback loop involved in this. Because once we secure UNESCO recognition for an item of ICH, or intangible cultural heritage, our country and our government must then commit to preserve the same, and indeed provide the resources to do so. The same is true of other countries when they adhere to the convention and bring things forward. I believe that falconry is something that many countries are coming together over. Ireland is joining in the effort to get falconry recognized. And this evening we have a generous example of this in the fact that Mary Louise will play some 17th century Irish harp pieces, including by the great Turlough O'Carroll. So how else can we memorialize the history of the colleges than to commemorate and preserve our heritage? The college in Leuven, dating back to the 1600s, was at the forefront of what today we might call intangible cultural heritage, preserving and nurturing not just the faith, but definitely the faith, but also the Gaelic heritage, language, literature, history and culture, and forging that early Irish identity that Taoiseach Bertie and others have spoken of. But it also contributed to the Europeanization of that identity, and it's weaning away from a more insular, if not tribal identities, confronted at home by forcible Anglicization, frequent repression, and the exiling tragedies of profound alienation. One might say that Leuven was an important incubator of what today we call the global Irish. A word on the dignity of the emigre and the deprivation of exile, and this perhaps is, for me, the most important thing to say this evening. Tens of thousands of destitute Irish were often shunned by the common people in the host countries, considered akin to the Moriscos or the Roma vagabonds, while their nobles were honoured marginally, yet in poverty. Our exiled nobility became champions for the oppressed, not only seeking fortune abroad, as many rose up, but acting as patrons for righteous clergy to be advanced within the church, some exercising jus patronis as long as they could, which wasn't that long for some. Acting as patrons, but also exercising and lobbying the host countries to better care for the poor Irish abroad. And in my own way, as a former ambassador of the Order of Malta in Slovakia, we tried to nurture the integration of Roma children into the Slovak education system, which as such because they were not accustomed to modern ways of living and hygiene, they would be put into a stream for the mentally handicapped. So giving them a little bit of a lift up, they can be treated like everybody else. And indeed, that little project for the Roma in Slovakia was made to the Order of Malta with a significant donation from a Lutheran former UN colleague, the late Swedish Åke Linden. Now, the book therefore describes this rich history and all of these other things, but it is also the birth of a more inclusive notion of the Irish nation, being of the land rather than the blood or the tribe. And I think this is very important. I will stop there because I want you to hear Mary O'Donnell on the harp.
Good evening, everybody, and I hope you're enjoying this wonderful celebration. So I began there with two pieces, Madame Maxwell and Carolyn's Concerto. And I think a few of you recognised Carolyn's Concerto because its claim to fame is it's the most well-known of all Irish harp pieces. So if you ever want to challenge a harper or a harpist, ask them to play Carolyn's Concerto, and that will be an indication of their level. So I suppose Carolyn is always our go-to when we play music on the harp, for the simple reason that he is the most prolific of the Irish harper composers. Now, remember, the Irish harping tradition goes back over 1,000 years, and I could bore you for the next 3 hours with the history of the harp, but I won't do that, I promise. But Carolyn was born in Nobber in County Meath in 1670. He died in 1738. He wrote over 300 pieces, most of which were songs, but we've lost the song lyrics and we're left with instrumental pieces. And he's a very interesting character because he kind of is a hybrid almost of the old style of harping and the new kind of Anglo-classical influences or the Baroque influences of the time. So his music sounds actually quite classical in some ways, but at the heart of it is this lovely, rich Irish tradition. Now, as I say, Carolyn was born in 1670, but only 100 or 150 years before that, there was a completely different set of patronage in place. Carolyn used to travel to the houses of the rich and famous at the time, and how he earned his living was by composing a piece of music for the head of the household or a member of his family. That's why most Carolyn pieces are called after somebody. So Madame Maxwell or Fanny Power or George Brabazon or William O'Flynn, these were all the wealthy families of the period. Some of them were older Irish families, some of them were Norman families, and some of them were the New English families that had come in. But that's how he sought his patronage, by wandering in a sort of a peripatetic way to these houses of the rich and famous. But 100 or 150 years before that, it was a very, very different situation. The clans had a harper as part of their entourage, and it was an honour to be a harper, the same as it was an honour to be a filla, to be part of the clan, because you studied for decades to learn your trade. You were an expert in composition, you could accompany the recitation of poetry, and really it was a very honourable position. But of course, in the 16th and the 17th century, the turbulent times, not only did they have their negative impact on history and society, but of course they very much affected our culture as well. But harpers are very resilient people, so they figured out a way to keep earning a living. And thankfully they did, because I guess I am a descendant of that tradition all these centuries later. But the turning point, I suppose, is the 17th century, particularly around that time, 1601, the Battle of Kinsale. And one of the most beautiful pieces written from that period is about an O'Donnell, Red Hugh O'Donnell, who died in 1602 and who has been mentioned many, many times this evening. But this beautiful lament is called Cuine I Ronal, or the Lament for the O'Donnell. And I like to think of it as not only a lament for Red Hugh O'Donnell, but also a lament for the passing of that old order and the patronage of the harpers. figure as well, just like Carolyn, because so many of his songs were not only translated into different European languages, but they made their way all around the world. Songs like The Harp That Once Through Tara's Halls, The Minstrel Boy, To the War Is Gone, The Last Rose of Summer, Believe Me, If All Those Endearing Young Charms. We could spend the next hour singing Thomas Moore songs. Wouldn't that be wonderful? But I'd like to play just a couple of them for you this evening. I'd like to play The Last Rose of Summer and Believe Me, If All Those Endearing Young Charms.
birth of the more inclusive notion of the Irish nation, being those of the land rather than the blood or tribe. And on the side of the clergy, did we not see early stirrings of what might later be called liberation theology? No religious order was closer to this reality than the Franciscans. And in this grove of wisdom, some of our greatest minds and souls flourished. Certainly movements for justice that inspired the likes of Daniel O'Connell to not only campaign for Catholic emancipation, but for Jewish equality and African American emancipation against slavery. And so the forging of our multi-ethnic identity and the birth of nationhood brings out the uniqueness of Irishness as a struggle against colonialism, yet also a rejection of xenophobia, an Irishness that has always been quintessentially inclusive. In fact, one might argue that our historic and cultural regard for our most ancient saintly patrons, Patrick, Columcille and Bridget, can inspire our sustained respect for migrants, refugees and women. Is it not par excellence the golden rule applied? Do unto others as you would have them to do unto you. And this is the ethical primacy on which our engagement in the wider world is forged. From our global diaspora, especially our diplomacy and cultural outreach, advancing a strategic national vision that celebrates Ireland's leadership for human rights, humanitarian outreach and sustainable prosperity for all. And this perhaps is the greatest legacy of the Irish College, the College of Leuven.